The Denver Broncos gambled a lot on Russell Wilson and expected him to turn around the Broncos, but that wasn't the case at all in 2022. Wilson had the worst year of his career, and the Broncos sucked. It was a complete disaster, and Nathaniel Hackett managed to get fired in his first season as the head coach.
That was embarrassing. I'm embarrassed.
It was a mess, but Denver is still locked up with Russell Wilson for a while, and the focus needs to be making sure he can return to his Seattle form. And that's why the Broncos traded for Sean Payton. Sean Payton was the head coach of the New Orleans Saints for 15 years and had a lot of success. He won the Super Bowl in 2009 and made 3 NFC championships. In all, Payton finished his time in New Orleans with a .631 winning percentage in the regular season. He helped Drew Brees become one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Payton announced his retirement in January 2022, but it didn't last very long. A year later, Sean Payton was hired to be the Broncos head coach, but the Saints did still own his rights. So, Denver agreed to trade a first and second for a third and Sean Payton to the Saints. The Broncos have done quite the job of trading away first-round picks recently. In March 2022, the Seattle Seahawks traded away Russell Wilson and a fourth to the Denver Broncos for 2 firsts, 2 seconds, a fifth, Drew Lock, Shelby Harris, and Noah Fant. The Broncos gave him a massive 5-year, $245 million extension. He was supposed to be the savior for Denver, and he just sucked. Wilson went 4-11, throwing for 3,524 yards and 16 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, while completing a career-low 60.5% of his passes. It was a mess, and Wilson led the league, being sacked 55 times for 368 yards. Usually, when a player is sacked a lot, the blame goes on the offensive line. And the Broncos had an average at best line last season, but Russell Wilson was a problem. He wasn't escaping pressure. The only player in the league that got sacked more often when pressured was Baker Mayfield, who is now on his 4th team in the past calendar year. Wilson was causing himself to be sacked and missing receivers, but his supporting cast will still be better this season. The Broncos made offensive line a very clear emphasis this offseason and shelled out a lot of money in free agency. They signed Mike McGlinchey to a 5-year, $87.5 million contract. He spent the last 5 seasons in San Francisco, and he should be a very reliable right tackle in Denver. They also gave Ben Powers a 4-year, $51.5 million deal. He didn't consistently start in the league until 2021, but he was good in Baltimore, and he's probably going to start at guard for the Broncos. Then the rest of the line is just guys that are already returning and have actually all been drafted by Denver. Garrett Bowles will start at left tackle. He's been a consistent starter for the Broncos, but he actually broke his leg last year, and that was probably one of the biggest reasons why the line was so bad. Lloyd Cushenberry will probably play center, but he got buried pretty deep on the depth chart in 2022. He hasn't been very good. Then Quinn Miners was probably the Broncos' best offensive lineman last season at right guard. Now, don't forget just how injured the Broncos' offensive line was in 2022. I think that played a huge role in Russell Wilson struggling and just the offense as a whole playing poorly. Even then, the line still wasn't that bad. It'll be better this year after getting McGlinchey and Powers, but if that line can just stay healthy, they can actually be a pretty decent unit. That's kind of the same sentiment with the wide receiver core that's just really talented. There have been a lot of rumblings of a potential Jerry Jeudy trade, but it's not happening. He is coming off of the best season of his career with 972 yards and 6 touchdowns and has been improving, but he still has one really big issue: drops. For whatever reason, Jeudy really struggles with drops and has every single year in the league. His rookie season, he only caught 44% of his targets, a brutal mark. It's gotten better, but it's still been around 67% for the last 2 years, which is bad. He's explosive and a good player, but the drops have to stop. Courtland Sutton has been Mr. Reliable for the Broncos for a minute now. In 5 seasons in Denver, he's had over 700 yards each year except for one, 2020, when he tore his ACL in his first game of the season. Jeudy and Sutton are the big 1-2 for Denver, and I think they're both fine. I don't necessarily love either one as a 1, but I like the Broncos wide receiver depth when they are healthy. Tim Patrick tore his ACL last offseason and didn't play at all in 2022, and KJ Hamler missed a lot of time after he suffered a torn pec last offseason. It was a mess. I think the injuries and the unknown at the position led the Broncos to using a second-round pick on a wide receiver, Marvin Mims. He played at Oklahoma for 3 years and is coming off of a 1,000-yard season. The tight end spot is held down by a third last year, Greg Dulcich. He actually had a pretty good rookie season with 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he's pretty good. He's not one of those top tight ends, but he can continue to develop, and him and Russell Wilson very clearly had a nice rapport last year. Finally, that leaves running back, where Javonte Williams was supposed to dominate in his second season in the league. I am telling you, I took him in so many fantasy drafts and was so sure he was going to break out, but he tore his ACL and LCL in week 4, ending his season. Injuries just about crushed the Broncos in every way last season. I know the offense was bad, but there were some pretty good excuses there. They just couldn't move the ball down the field, which is a real shame because the defense was really good. Denver should be better on the defensive side of the ball, and I think a lot of that is due to the secondary. It may be the best part of the entire team. Safety is tied up really well with Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson. Simmons led the league with 6 interceptions last season and was named an All-Pro for the 3rd time. Meanwhile, Jackson has been super reliable in Denver and just continues to get re-signed on 1-year deals every offseason. I don't know why, but that's been the theme. As good as Simmons is, I do think Patrick Surtain is taking over that title as the best player on the Broncos defense. He was a 2021 first-round pick, and he has quickly become one of the best cornerbacks in the league. On the other side of him is Damari Mathis, who was solid as a rookie after Denver took him in the 4th round. Under them at inside linebacker is Alex Singleton and Josie Jewell. Singleton was great last year with 163 tackles, 5th most in the league. He was only on a 1-year deal, but Denver made sure to keep him around with a 3-year, $18 million extension. Not only has Singleton been good, but he has a really cool story too. He went undrafted in 2015 and ended up playing in the Canadian Football League. He was an All-Star and won a Grey Cup, which is basically their Super Bowl. Singleton then signed with the Eagles in 2019, and he's stuck around in the NFL since. At outside linebacker, Randy Gregory is back at the strong side. His first season in Denver really didn't go to plan after he suffered a knee injury, but he'll look to bounce back. On the weak side, Baron Browning will hold it down in his 3rd year in the pros. But most importantly for this Broncos defense, the Broncos have a new defensive coordinator, but he's not exactly a new face in Denver. Vance Joseph. He was the head coach of the Broncos in 2018 and 2019. After 3 seasons as the Cardinals defensive coordinator, he is back, and so is his 3-4 scheme. The defensive line is certainly one of the weaker parts of the Broncos roster. DJ Jones should be at nose tackle, Matt Henningsen at defensive end, and opposite him will be another new face to Denver, Zach Allen. The Broncos just gave him a bag, 3 years, $45.75 million. He was actually really good in Arizona under Vance Joseph, and they're back together in Denver. There are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the Denver Broncos. Sean Payton is a wizard and had a lot of success in the league, and that wasn't by accident. If anyone can help turn Russell Wilson around, it is probably him, but Russ was really bad last year. He didn't even look like the same guy. It was ugly. I think a lot of that had to do with a bad offensive line and the offense having no identity whatsoever. But that doesn't excuse Russ. He was objectively bad, but if he ends up looking the way he did in Seattle, the Broncos could be really good. Life is rough in the West, but surely the Broncos roster, if Russ performs well, is good enough to be a postseason team.